Let me just take a quick second to get set up here. So jarred by the loss of the laser pointer. We're going to get through this together. Okay. Hi, my name is Fred Copeman. I am the project manager for my capstone group alongside our wonderful faculty advisor, Jessica Prada. I'm really excited to be here this evening to tell you a bit about the work that my group did this semester, building an environmental impact tool for our client Renewable. So during this presentation, I will tell you a bit about the client. I'll give some description of this impact tool that we created. I'll walk this group through the user manual, our inaugural impact inventory. I'll discuss some of the analysis and research that we performed, and then talk about some of the recommendations that we mapped out. So who's Renewable and what do they do? Renewable is an agricultural technology company and startup, and they have invented a proprietary process through which they can create a fertilizer for indoor farming from pre-consumer unrecoverable food waste. So it's created this closed loop that you can see here on this slide, and it's a really exciting technology. What problem did they come to us with? Well, Renewable has always wanted to show themselves as the most sustainable choice, but they've always existed in this really crowded and competitive space. So they came to us with a lot of different questions. Should we build a GHG inventory? Should we pursue a B Corp certification? Should we look into using our production management software to track our emissions? And so it's actually quite a challenge to take all these great goals that they have and try to narrow that down to a scope of work for our project. But we were able to bring things to these three main questions. First, is Renewable in fact a more sustainable choice? Second, how could we quantify that? And third, if they can't show this yet, how could we help them get there? So the solution we... My iPad wanted to chime in. So the solution we developed was to create them an environmental impact inventory. And it would be a simple a simple Excel-based tool that tracks both GHG emissions as well as water use, wastewater, recyclables, and solid waste. And then with this tool, we would have that inaugural inventory, some research and analysis, and some strategic recommendations. So these are the 4 deliverables. So the first deliverable is the tool itself. As I said, it's a simple Excel-based tool. It primarily focuses on the 3 scopes of GHG emissions as laid out by the GHG protocol. But as I said, we also included wastewater, water use, and recyclables as one of the few ways we wanted to help differentiate it from kind of a classic GHG tool. So a major piece of the tool was how can we make it as user-friendly as possible? So my team did a really amazing job building emissions factors and functions and formulas behind the scenes, where the user experience is really just taking utility bills and waste figures and plugging that in and flipping to a results page to see what your impact is. A really important piece of this user friendliness was we wanted to create a user manual that would accompany the tool. The idea here is that Renewable right now doesn't have a full-time sustainability professional, and maybe they won't for a few years or a long time. So we want this to be something that a layperson can operate. So the manual assumes nothing about the user's understanding of environmental or sustainability tracking. It even includes some kind of play-by-play scenarios to help solve common issues. And we've also shot a demo video, which will help, again, answer hopefully any questions that a user might run into in using this tool. Once we created and populated the tool, we'd arrived at our second deliverable, which was the impact inventory itself. So what did we find? Given that Renewable is a startup, we definitely ran into several large gaps in the data they were able to provide us. However, we were careful to denote those areas, not only for our capstone project, but also for the future. The hope is that Renewable is going to go back and do this again next year. And so we wanted to be really careful to flag those areas where data was missing so that they know what to really target in next year's effort. But this image here shows the results for this inaugural inventory, and where we landed was 36.7 metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent. Now, it's important to talk about the boundaries we had to set given the data limitations. So with scope 1, they do no chemical processing on site. There's no mobile combustion that they take part in. And their stationary combustion really falls on the responsibility of the business park that their production facility is in. So scope 1 is limited to fugitive emissions. Scope 2 is rather straightforward. It's indirect emissions from electricity generation. And scope 3, unfortunately, we were only able to get scope 3 category 6 business travel from the client. So given these boundaries, the real emissions culprit in this inventory is scope 2. And given that, in the written report, we've detailed some important recommendations. I believe they were the purchase of renewable energy credits and performing an energy audit. The third piece I want to highlight from the inventory is these non-GHG factors. So as I said, we looked at water, we looked at waste, et cetera. I want to point out this super high wastewater diversion rate, almost 90%. They can thank their reverse osmosis water reclamation system, which is built right into their production process. So we were excited to find this number. We hope it's something that they can highlight in this constant journey of theirs to show how they're different and more sustainable. And it also plays well into a recommendation I'll speak to later. So our first deliverable was the tool. The second was our inventory. And the third is some research and analysis that we performed. And it mainly focused on what their peers are up to. So as I said, they exist in a crowded and competitive space. And there are a number of their peer companies that are starting to take some sustainability steps. I've highlighted some here in yellow. Some are trying to align their operations with the UN's Sustainable Development Goals. Some are starting to work with the CDP on some disclosure there. I think one was even working on a GRI report. But these are outliers. I would say for the most part, their competitors and peers aren't quite there yet. So Renewable's really well positioned to make this case that they want to make about being the most sustainable. And we went a bit further to look into, what are some other steps they could do to get there. They had expressed a lot of interest in a B Corp certification. We looked into it. Obviously, B Corp's a highly recognizable brand, and it does focus on a number of non-environmental sustainability dimensions, but we still think this would absolutely be worth pursuing. And we think used correctly, our tool should aid in this process, especially in checking those boxes under the environmental category. But more importantly, we wanted to look at certifications that their competition was not engaging with yet, but still had some brand recognition. And that brought us to the True Zero Waste certification. As we saw before, Renewable's already taking some really cool steps with their water reclamation process. Their waste numbers are fairly small for a business their size. So they're already well on their way. It's a certification with I would say a growing recognition. And it plays really well into this narrative of Renewable being a low waste company. Remember, the feedstock for their primary product is food waste. So I want to talk a bit about the recommendations. As I said, there's 2 impact reduction recommendations that we made in our written report. But tonight I wanted to focus on 4 recommendations, which feel like a continuation of this quantification process that we've started. The first is, as I said, to pursue a True Zero Waste certification, something I think they're well on their way towards. The second is to expand their scope 3 inventory. As we saw, there's a lot of data missing there. And if they want to take this further, that's sort of a no question step that leads quite well into the third recommendation, which is to create a GRI or SASB report. As I think we all know, that's a really great way to show your stakeholders that you're prioritizing sustainability. And most importantly, we want them to create an up-to-date life cycle assessment of their main fertilizer product, Away We Grow. As I said, the main feedstock for that product is food waste. This is something their competition is not doing. It's really exciting, and an LCA would help them get there. So in closing, I want to say a few thank yous to our client Renewable for the opportunity, to our faculty advisor Jessica for her friendship and guidance, to my deputy managers Yoni and Cassandra for helping me steer the ship, and to our team leads Ying, Emma, and Caroline for their tireless work, and everyone in the class for each finding a piece of expertise to own in this process. Thank you very much, and you can now take your questions. Yeah.
Hi, you said that Renewable doesn't have a sustainability professional working there. I'm just curious who you recommend spearheads the recommendations that you're making in the company.
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. And it's interesting because they're a startup. So there's a couple different people I could answer with. We worked in particular with two individuals. The person I think would be most appropriate would be this gentleman who's heading up their production process. He's a busy guy, but he has made time for some of these questions already. And I think given that he's the most hands-on person, I think he's going to be the right human for the job. So yeah, I think that's where they'd start.
Hi, awesome job. So it sounds like sort of one of the key motivators behind them wanting to do this was a way to differentiate themselves. I'm curious if you did any other type of like stakeholder analysis, are they getting questions or pressure from customers or anyone else, or do you think this is really sort of a way to differentiate themselves as a startup?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And I think the answer comes down to who their stakeholders are right now. And it's a shifting and evolving situation. They're a startup, they're small. I think they're trying to gain more investor interest. And so I think their thinking is sustainability has already been a part of their story, but I think they can bolster and garner some more interest by being able to showcase to potential new stakeholders that they are the sustainable company. I don't know, does that answer your question? Okay.
Hi, first off, great presentation. Second, my question is, you focused on scope 2 emissions because scope 1 emissions were insignificant because they were working from a leased facility, but based off on what they do, which is making this fertilizer, one would assume that there would be some scope 1 emissions, right? So were they not part of your project, or I mean, why weren't they accounted for?
Yeah, no, it's an excellent question. So we did our best to capture every piece of emissions data possible, whether it be part of a leased asset that's technically the responsibility of another party, or whether it's their responsibility. Even within that, we still found some gaps, but there's a large piece of our written report which talks to steering this process towards a little more detail next year, especially that. I always came at this with the opinion that even if stationary combustion emissions, for example, are the responsibility of the business park, I still think there's a place for it in Renewable's inventory. And then you find the way to report it correctly. But I totally agree. And that speaks a lot to the scope 3 process as well. There's 15 categories of scope 3. There's only going to be so many that are relevant to Renewable, but I'd still love to see them gather data and report out on all of them, and then get strategic with the ones which are particularly pertinent to their business. Okay, thank you all so much.